Hello everyone, this is Reza, and this week we're going to talk about Hypershade, the attributes for AI Standard Surface, and how to apply textures to your AI Standard Surface base color section. So I do have a simple scene here. I've divided my basically viewport into two sections. One is Hypershade. To bring up Hypershade as a floating window, all you need to do is just to click on this button right here. What I did, I basically went with layout, two panes, and then for each panel, I went to panel and picked my basically item. So what do you want to have in the left hand side, and what do you want to have in panel in the right hand side. For the left hand side I went with Hypershade. For the right hand side I went with render view. Obviously Arnold render is my preferred renderer, and that's why I'm going to cover AI Standard Surface, a little bit of Hypershade, how to work with the work area within the Hypershade, and how to apply textures to your model. I do have the scene on a separate monitor. Basically what I did, I switched to perspective so I can work independently and tear off a copy, and then moved it to the other side so I can actually select the model and apply whatever shader I want to apply to it. Just so you know, you can do that through the viewport as well. Now, without wasting any time, let's go ahead and let's apply AI Standard Surface to our model. So there are two ways of doing this. One is to create AI Standard Surface here, drag and drop to your object. Next is just to select your object, right click on it, and just pick AI Standard Surface. So assign new material. You go and collapse unrelated tab, you go to shader, and in here you pick AI Standard Surface. It comes on the right hand side in attribute editor, so I'm going to call this AI default color, and let's move that to the side, and I'm just going to click on, I just wanted to pick a region, so I'm not going to render the whole thing, and basically you can just render a region with that. Now let's very quickly go through some of the important attributes and get them out of the way, and then eventually I'll show you how to apply a texture to AI Standard, so on and so forth. So let's talk about AI Standard Surface, and let's explore what type of shader we're dealing with here. So what makes a Standard Surface shader unique is it's physically based shader. And we can turn that shader into many types of materials. We can produce metal, we can produce see-through objects or materials like glass, we can force the shader to preserve the light, and the right term for that is subsurface scattering effects, and it's great for making materials like skin. We can create thin scattering for water and ice, secondary specular a code, light emission, and so on and so forth. A lot can be done with AI Standard. It's our to-go shader, at least for this trimester. That's what we're going to practice all the way through. And there's some very actually important attributes that we need to be aware of before we use this shader. So let's explore them really quickly. So obviously the first one, probably the easiest one, is base. Weight defines how bright the surface is when lit directly. So if I kind of dial this down, what's going to happen in here? Well, if I kick off a render, what's going to happen here, it becomes the surface becomes darker, and if I increase the surface, it becomes brighter. Then we have the easy one, which is the color. So I'm just going to bring this one back to 0.8, the value, the original value. And then color is obviously very straightforward. We use color chips here or color palette to change the color. We usually don't use that much. So what you want to do eventually, you want to click on that checkerboard item here or icon here to plug a texture. That's what you usually want to do. Even if it's a plain matte color, you still want to have probably freckles or dust or grime or secondly layer of dirt or whatever that is. You can actually change it in a form of a texture and then apply it to this color. We're going to skip diffuse roughness for now. We're not going to use that. I will get back to this attribute later. For now, I'm just going to describe the important attributes first and get them out of the way, and we'll come back to the remaining of the attributes. So metalness is pretty important. With metalness set to 1, the surface behaves like a metal. So I'm just going to increase that, and all of a sudden we have metal. And we're using fully specular reflection and a complex Fresnel, which is great. You can kind of have a hybrid in between sort of situation. Now we have, if you bring it down, the value down to something like 0.5, then you have something in between. It's more like a painted metal, which has a bit of a roughness in it. It's good. You can actually make it a bit darker, and that's one attribute with diffuse roughness. It roughens the bright areas a little, and you get quite an interesting result. Usually when you increase this, it darkens the effect. Now if it's metalness set to 1, then there's nothing to be darkening, so diffuse roughness is going to be disabled like so. I'm just going to reduce it down to 0.5, or actually set it back to 0, the default value, and moving on to the next. So the next very important subsection is specular. So basically all the highlights and reflections that you see makes the object reflective comes from specular. At least a good part of it comes from specular tab or subsection. So let's explore that. Obviously weight is the intensity. You turn it off, you turn the material to something like rubber band or carpet. There won't be any reflection whatsoever. Color is going to give it more like an artificial specular color. If you have colored lights in the scene, if that object is placed in a location like a nightclub where it's all full of colors, then you may get an effect like that, but usually I set that to a neutral color like white. It's just more it adds realism to the scene that you have. Next one is roughness, and that attribute controls the glossiness of your specular reflection. The lower the value, probably it's much easier to turn this into a metal than I can show you. The lower the value here, the sharper the reflection is going to be. So we're dealing with 0.1 roughness, so it's pretty glossy. And of course, if I reduce this to something like 0, then it will give you a perfectly sharp mirror reflection. I'm not sure if this is something that you want unless you are actually modeling a mirror. Otherwise, I usually put at least 0.1 in there, again, to just have a little bit of realism in this scene. And of course, as I increase the value, you can see how diffuse or rough the reflection is going to be. It kind of spreads out the reflection. Something like 0.25 in this example shows it clearly that Now I don't have crystal clear reflection anymore. And you can actually connect maps into this, black areas. Basically, connected map gives you variation in specular highlights. So if you have roughness set to 0, all the white portion is going to be completely reflective, and black portion in your map is going to block the specularity altogether. So you can use that to your advantage. Now I moved back some of these attributes to default to get that the metal reflective metal looking object that I wanted. The next item on the list is in the index of refraction. If you set the metalness to 1, you deactivate index of refraction. Any value lower than 1, and you enable index of refraction. But what is index of refraction? It defines the material's Fresnel. Now, if you don't know what Fresnel equation is, in a simplest form possible, it describes the reflection and transmission of light. So it's going to be less reflective from the angle that is perpendicular to the camera, and it gets more reflective as you move away from the camera to the borders. So you basically get sort of more reflection when you increase it. So by default, the index of refraction is set to a kind of low value, and every time you get that 3 dashes, you can actually click on it and set up a preset like index of refraction for diamond, for sapphire, for skin, for water, for ice, and again Arnold changes it accordingly. You can actually Google or search, browse around for index of refraction for different materials, and it's physically based accurate. That's the beauty with Arnold. You can actually, because everything is physically accurate, you can actually search for some of these attributes and get the exact value and punch them in. So you're probably not going to see much of a difference here, but for example, index of refraction of 2, index of refraction of 0.1, but when we introduce transmission, you see a significant change because it has a direct effect on refractivity and how the way that the light bends. Index of refraction is going to make a huge difference. As a result of that, we have a lot of objects with transmission, such as flint glass, glass, ice, plastic, sapphire, skin, diamond, and water, and subsurface scattering for skin. So it plays a huge role when we enable transmission. Next in the list is anisotropy. So it reflects and transmits light with a directional bias. And because of that, you get some sort of a skewed highlights rather than a defined shape. It's suitable for materials that have clear kind of brush direction, such as brushed metal, which has a tiny grooves in it, and it creates that stretched looking anisotropy reflection. So if I increase it to 1, you can see all of my reflection are kind of stretched right now. It works great on a compact disc, the back of the compact disc. Again, anything like clear brushed metal will somehow get that anisotropy. Can of Coke usually get that anisotropy around the body, and so many objects that you just need to look in real life and see what sort of object gets that effect. And of course, once you have that, you can actually fix the angle and rotate the anisotropy direction. Next tab on the list is transmission, which is, well, equally important. Let's make a few changes here. So I'm going to bring down the metalness to 0. I'm just going to increase the color a little. Just to give you a quick tip on some extra attributes before we get to the transmission, we have a preset here. You can actually select your model and apply some presets to it, and that's usually a good starting point. I wouldn't say that by applying these you just get the final look. No, but it usually gives you a really good starting point. For example, this is gold material. You can have clay, and you can see automatically Maya changes all these attributes for you, which is sort of convenient. Now, one of these is glass. And you apply, and you see some areas of see-through object. Every time you deal with glass, you have to take one extra step. And that one extra step is to select the model that you want to apply glass to, go to its shape node via attribute editor, and then we have Arnold here, and make sure opaque is off. And you can see all of a sudden a lot of these black spots will go away, because we tell Arnold that this object is no longer an opaque object, it's a see-through object. So before and after. So you can see it makes a huge difference. Now with that, we may want to have a look at index of refraction. Now if I change that index of refraction to something like 1.1, we get a very different look, because we no longer receive that severe light bending effect. Whereas if I set this one to diamond preset, every single area is heavily warped, which kind of is something that you see in diamond because of the thickness. So the index of refraction, when we have transmission set to 1, plays a huge role. If you want to turn off the glass, simply go and zero it out. You can increase the metalness, so on and so forth. But every time you switch from a glass to an opaque, you have to make sure to go back and click on opaque. Just let Arnold know that it's no longer a glass material, it's an opaque material, it's a rigid object, it blocks light, so it behaves accordingly. Now I'm just going to bring transmission back to 1, and now with weight, just like other weight attributes in other subsection, it changes the intensity, or intensifying the effect can be managed via this slider. So it allows light to scatter through the surface for materials such as glass and water. Usually if you want to get full effect, you set it to 1. Then color, this filters the refraction, so you kind of tint the glass in a way. So I usually don't go with super colorful or vibrant color. Something mild like this pale yellow is great. Next one is depth, and that is kind of an interesting attribute. I use that a lot when I use glass, again to add realism. Increasing the value makes the volume thinner, surprisingly, and more realistic. So in thick areas, for example, this is a thick area, the base is fairly thick. So if I set this one to a value of 10, which is a high value for this attribute, all of a sudden other areas lose that color, but thick areas kind of hold on to that color, and that creates a really nice tint. I increase it some more, and again you can see a little bit of color, and this is something that you get with thick glasses. You usually get the tint from very specific angles or where the object is very thick. So I found that having that attribute can be actually quite helpful. Now, just one quick thing about this attribute: it is scene scale dependent. So with bigger scenes, you probably need to increase that value more to see the effect and to see that the kind of transmission color is fading through the glass. So be mindful of the scene scale. If it's too small, whatever appears is incorrect. So as I say often, you just need to go with the right scale, right scene scale, correct measurements to get the right result. And this is something that you need to be mindful. And of course, the last one is scatter, which is a transmission scatter. Usually I use that for liquid, thick liquid. If it's deeply, for something like, a deep body of water or something like honey, when you kind of get that scatter, then you increase the value, and you can see immediately it kind of scatters the light. For something like, I don't know, maybe ocean, it is something that you probably want to do. For ice or a milky glass, maybe a little bit of it is necessary, but for other but if you aim a clear, very vibrant textures within your liquid, then probably stay away from scatter. Then we have anisotropy. Again, you can skew or stretch the reflection or the transmission effect of your liquid. And of course, this is not super important, but the dispersion attribute is ideal for gemstone like diamond. I'm not sure if you've seen that type of color change. I'm just gonna, so you can see it kind of brings, probably need to switch back to a neutral transmission color for that. So actually I have a GIF file here. So to see that the kind of play of these colors, they come and go. It's like a rainbow color. So that's dispersion that we're talking about, and you can actually have a preset, have sapphire dispersion, intensify the effect, so on and so forth, and you can add roughness to that as well. Now, before we wrap up, I'm just going to quickly show you how to apply textures, and we leave it at that because there are many attributes in here that probably not necessary at this stage for me to get into all of these attributes in one go. I can break this down into different videos and have part 2 or part 3 of aiStandardSurface. But now the important part is how to apply a texture. Before I do that, I'm just going to use one of these presets. I probably pick plastic would be a good one. I'm just going to go with a good old plastic. Perfect. Just make sure to go back to the shape node and tick opaque. I've already done that. Now, all you need to do is to click on this checkerboard and then click on File and navigate to File Attribute, click on that folder icon, and once you apply, you can see the results. So whatever texture you have, you can bring it over. Now the question is, can we change those presets while we or when we apply a texture? If I go to rubber, I still preserve the connection here, but what I change in this particular case is specularity attributes, sometimes transmission. So be careful what you pick. So when I have something applied to the color, I don't want to go and pick transparent attributes, because then you kind of lose the effect a little bit, and what you get might be just a tad confusing. I do see a little bit of my texture, but probably for this one, clay would be a good one, just to to give the object some style. But you got the idea. So you can actually play around with some of these presets, but again, please keep that in mind, that these are some really good starting points. Don't rely on them as polished final result. Always use what you have and just continue building on what you already have to create a more polished result. Now, this is it. That's a very quick overview on how to use aiStandardSurface. I had Hypershade on the left hand side, didn't really use it much. We're going to talk about this more in the future. But now you know how to apply your textures to your model, how to use aiStandard in conjunction with your Arnold lights and Arnold renderer. These three are perfect combinations, and you can create hyper realistic imagery through careful planning. And of course, now you know some of these key attributes, you can really enhance the look of your render. All right, see you guys soon. Bye.